The blizzard came down like a curtain of white death, and Katherine Jones knew her father had finally done what he had been threatening to do for months. He had sold her to pay his gambling debts. She stood shivering on the wooden porch of Sullivan's Saloon in Green River, Wyoming, watching as men passed her between them like currency, their voices muffled by the howling wind that tore through the main street. It was December of 1884, and the snow was burying the town so thoroughly that she could barely see the mercantile across the way. Her thin cotton dress offered no protection against the bitter cold, and her bare feet had gone numb on the ice-covered planks. She had turned 20 just 3 weeks ago, a birthday that had passed without celebration, without even acknowledgement from her father, who had been too deep in his whiskey bottle to remember he had a daughter at all. The man who currently held her arm was called Dutch Malone, a cattle rustler with a reputation for cruelty that stretched from Cheyenne to Salt Lake City. He smelled of unwashed clothes and rot-gut whiskey, his grip bruising as he yanked her forward into the saloon's dim interior. Her father sat slumped at a corner table, unable to meet her eyes, his weathered face a map of shame and weakness. Katherine wanted to scream at him, to demand how he could do this to his own flesh and blood, but her throat had closed with fear and betrayal. She had nursed him through pneumonia last winter. She had cooked and cleaned and mended his clothes. She had buried her mother 5 years ago and had taken over all the household duties without complaint, and this was how he repaid her devotion. "She is worth more than what you are offering," another voice cut through the smoky air. Katherine turned to see a man in a fine wool coat, his dark eyes calculating as they swept over her trembling form. This was Bernard Hastings, a wealthy rancher who owned half the land between here and Rock Springs. "I will give you $200 for her." Dutch Malone's face reddened with anger. "We had a deal, Hastings. Her father owes me and I am collecting." "Her father owes half the territory," Hastings replied smoothly. "I am offering actual money, not just the cancellation of debt. Think about it, Malone. You could use that cash for your operation, could you not?" Katherine felt bile rise in her throat. They were haggling over her like she was a horse or a piece of furniture. Her eyes darted toward the door, calculating whether she could make a run for it, but where would she go in this storm? She had no coat, no shoes, no money. She would freeze to death before she made it 3 blocks. Her father finally lifted his head, and she saw tears tracking through the grime on his cheeks, but he said nothing. He just sat there, broken and pathetic, while strange men decided her fate. The saloon door burst open with such force that it slammed against the interior wall, sending a cascade of snow swirling into the room. Every head turned to see who had arrived with such dramatic timing. The man who stood in the doorway was tall and broad-shouldered, ice crystals clinging to his dark hair and the stubble on his strong jaw. He wore a sheepskin coat and leather gloves, and his gray eyes swept the room with an intensity that made Katherine's breath catch. She had seen him around town before, always riding that big roan stallion, always keeping to himself. His name was Isaiah Hart, and he owned a ranch about 15 miles north of Green River, running cattle and horses with just a small crew of hired hands. "I heard you boys are conducting business tonight," Isaiah said, his voice low and steady as he stepped fully into the saloon and pushed the door shut behind him. "Business involving that young woman." Dutch Malone straightened, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun at his hip. "This does not concern you, Hart. Move along." Isaiah did not move along. Instead, he walked further into the room, his boots leaving wet prints on the scarred wooden floor. "I am making it my concern. Katherine, is it?" He looked directly at her, and for the first time that night, someone was actually seeing her as a human being rather than property. "Do you want to be here?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "No, speak up," Isaiah said, but not unkindly. "Do you want to go with any of these men?" "No." This time her voice rang clear and strong through the saloon. "I do not want any of this. I never agreed to any of this." Isaiah nodded as though this confirmed exactly what he had suspected. He turned his attention to her father. "Marcus Jones, you are a pitiful excuse for a man selling your own daughter, but I am going to give you a way out of this that does not end with you burning in hell." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with the weight of coins. "I have $500 here. That will cover his debts to you, Malone, and whatever he owes around town. Consider his slate clean." Bernard Hastings laughed, a cold sound that held no humor. "And what do you get out of this transaction, Hart, the girl?" "I get the satisfaction of knowing I did the right thing," Isaiah replied evenly. "And yes, Katherine is coming home with me, not as property but as a person who needs help, unless she would prefer to stay in this town with a father who trades her like livestock." Katherine's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She knew Isaiah Hart by reputation only. He was said to be fair with his workers, honest in his dealings, and he kept to himself after his wife had died in childbirth 3 years ago. The baby had not survived either, and he had become something of a recluse, focusing entirely on building his ranch. She knew nothing else about him, but standing here in this saloon with men who looked at her like she was meat, he seemed like salvation itself. "I will go with you," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I will go with you right now." Dutch Malone moved to block their path. "Now hold on just a minute, we are not done here." Isaiah's expression did not change, but something dangerous flickered in his gray eyes. "I believe we are. Take the money or do not, but that woman is leaving with me." His hand moved to rest on his own gun, and the message was clear. He was willing to back up his words with action if necessary. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Katherine could hear her own breathing, could hear the crackling of the fire in the pot-bellied stove, could hear the wind howling outside like a living thing. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Bernard Hastings broke the standoff by reaching for the leather pouch. He counted out coins with swift efficiency, dividing them into piles. "Malone, here is what Jones owes you. The rest covers his tabs at the Mercantile, the Livery, and here at Sullivan's. The debt is paid. The girl walks." Malone looked like he wanted to argue, but the promise of actual cash in hand won out over his wounded pride. He snatched up his portion and shoved it into his pocket. "This is not over, Hart." "It is," Isaiah said flatly. "Katherine, come here." She moved on numb feet, crossing the space between them on legs that threatened to give out. When she reached him, Isaiah shrugged out of his sheepskin coat and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it, still holding his body heat, made her want to weep with relief. He looked down at her bare feet and frowned deeply. "Did they not even let you get your shoes?" "I do not have any," she admitted, shame flooding through her. "They wore out last month and we could not afford new ones." Something like anger flashed across Isaiah's face, but it was not directed at her. He turned to the bartender. "Sullivan, do you have any boots that might fit her?" The bartender, a graying man with kind eyes, nodded and disappeared into the back room. He returned with a pair of worn but serviceable leather boots. "My daughter left these when she moved to Laramie. They should do." Katherine took them gratefully, sinking onto a nearby chair to pull them on. They were slightly too large, but they would work. Isaiah waited patiently, then offered her his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. His hand was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for everything he had. She glanced back once at her father, hoping for some word, some apology, something. But Marcus Jones had his head down on the table, either passed out or wishing he was. Isaiah guided her toward the door, keeping himself between her and the other men in the saloon. When they stepped outside, the cold hit her like a physical blow despite the coat. The snow was coming down so heavily that visibility was reduced to just a few feet. Isaiah's horse was tied at the rail, a magnificent roan that stood patiently despite the weather. There was also a smaller bay mare tied beside it. "Can you ride?" Isaiah asked. "Yes," Katherine said. "My mother taught me when I was young." "Good. That mare is steady. She will get you home safely." He helped her mount, his hands respectful and careful. Once she was settled in the saddle, he swung up onto his own horse with easy grace. "It is about 15 miles to my ranch. In this storm, it will take us a few hours. Stay close to me and do not try to talk. Save your energy." "Can you do that?" Katherine nodded, clutching the reins with fingers that were already aching from the cold. Isaiah reached over and adjusted the coat around her shoulders, making sure it was covering as much of her as possible. Then he took the lead, guiding his horse out into the white maelstrom. She followed, keeping her mare's nose nearly touching the roan's hindquarters so she would not lose sight of him. The ride was a nightmare of cold and fear. The wind tore at them with vicious strength, and the snow was so thick that sometimes she could barely see Isaiah even though he was just a few feet ahead. Her face went numb, and she tucked her chin down into the collar of the coat, trying to preserve what little warmth she had. She could not feel her hands anymore, could not feel her feet despite the boots. All she could do was hold on and trust that Isaiah Hart knew where he was going. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours. The world had narrowed to the swirling white and the dark shape of the man ahead of her. She found herself focusing on him, on the steady way he sat his horse, on the confidence in every movement. He had walked into that saloon and bought her freedom without even knowing her. Why? What did he want from her? The question circled in her mind, but she was too cold and exhausted to find an answer. Finally, blessedly, shapes began to emerge from the snow. Buildings, a barn, corrals, Isaiah's ranch. He led her straight to the barn, dismounting and hurrying to help her down. Her legs gave out the moment her feet touched the ground, and he caught her, steadying her with strong arms. "I have got you," he said. "Can you stand?" "I think so," she managed through chattering teeth. He kept one arm around her waist as he led her toward the house, calling out for someone named Jack. A young man appeared from the barn, bundled in layers of wool and leather. "Boss, you made it back. Take care of the horses," Isaiah ordered. "Rub them down good and give them extra feed." "They earned it tonight." "Yes, sir." Jack took the reins of both animals and led them into the barn's shelter. Isaiah got Katherine up the porch steps and through the front door into warmth that felt like heaven itself. The house was modest but well built, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall of the main room. A fire burned in it, casting dancing shadows across simple furniture and braided rugs. He guided her to a chair near the fire and knelt to help her remove the wet boots. "We need to warm you up slowly. Too fast and it will hurt worse." Katherine nodded, unable to form words. Now that they were out of the storm, reaction was setting in. Her whole body trembled violently and tears started streaming down her face. She tried to stop them, mortified at breaking down in front of this stranger who had saved her, but she could not hold them back. Isaiah disappeared and returned with several quilts. He wrapped them around her, layering them until she was cocooned in warmth. Then he went to the kitchen area and began heating water in a kettle. Katherine watched him through tear-blurred eyes, trying to understand what was happening. He moved with easy efficiency, clearly comfortable in his own space. The house was clean but lived in, masculine but not unwelcoming. There were books on a shelf near the fireplace, and she caught titles about animal husbandry and ranch management. He brought her a cup of hot tea, pressing it into her shaking hands. "Drink this slowly. It will help." She sipped obediently, and the warmth spreading through her chest was glorious. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse. "Why did you help me?" Isaiah pulled a chair over and sat down facing her, his elbows resting on his knees. "Because what was happening in that saloon was wrong. Because I have a daughter buried on a hill overlooking this ranch, and I would hope that if she had lived and ever needed help, someone would do the right thing." His voice was rough with old grief. "Because I am tired of watching bad men do bad things while good people stand by and do nothing." "You spent $500, Katherine whispered. "That is a fortune. It is money well spent if it keeps you safe." He paused, studying her face. "I want you to understand something, Katherine. You are not a servant here. You are not property. You are a person who needed help, and I provided it. You can stay here as long as you need to figure out what you want to do next. I have a spare room you can use. You will eat at my table and you will be treated with respect. Those are the terms. Do you understand?" Katherine stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or hidden motives, but his gray eyes were steady and sincere. "I do not understand you at all," she admitted. "Men do not do things like this without expecting something in return. Then you have known the wrong kind of men." Isaiah stood and went to stoke the fire, adding another log. "It is late and you need rest. Tomorrow we can talk more and you can decide what you want to do. For tonight, just know that you are safe." He showed her to a small bedroom that was simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. Clean nightclothes were laid out on the bed, and she realized they must have belonged to his late wife. The thought made her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you," she said inadequately. "Thank you for everything." Isaiah nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Katherine stood in the middle of the room for a long moment, hardly able to believe that just a few hours ago she had been standing in that saloon, being traded like property. Now she was in a warm house with a locked door between her and the rest of the world. She changed into the nightgown, which was soft flannel and smelled of cedar from storage. Then she climbed into the bed and pulled the quilts up to her chin. She thought she would lie awake for hours, her mind churning with everything that had happened. But exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When Katherine woke, sunlight was streaming through the window and the storm had passed. She lay still for a moment, disoriented before the memories of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up slowly, her body aching from the cold ride and the stress. Her dress from last night was hanging over the back of a chair, cleaned and dried. There was also a simple brown skirt and white blouse laid out, again clearly belonging to Isaiah's late wife. She dressed quickly, feeling strange about wearing a dead woman's clothes but having no alternative. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Isaiah in the kitchen, cooking breakfast. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the air, making her stomach growl loudly. He looked up and offered a small smile. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" Sore, confused, grateful. She moved closer, watching as he flipped bacon in the skillet. "Can I help? Can you make biscuits?" he asked. "Yes." "Then please do. Everything you need should be in that cupboard." He pointed with the spatula. They worked in companionable silence, and Katherine found something deeply comforting about the domestic routine. She mixed and kneaded the dough, shaped the biscuits, and got them into the oven. By the time everything was ready, the table was set for two, and they sat down to eat. The food was simple but delicious, and Katherine realized she could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. "I want to talk about your options," Isaiah said after they had both taken the edge off their hunger. First, if you want to leave, go somewhere else. I will give you money for travel and enough to get you started wherever you choose. Second, if you want to stay in this area but not here, I can help you find a job in town, maybe at the hotel or the dress shop. Third, you can stay here and work for me. I need help around the house and I can pay you fair wages. You would have your own room, meals, and independence. Katherine set down her fork, overwhelmed by the choices. Choices. Real choices, not ultimatums or demands. What would staying here and working for you involve? Cooking, cleaning, mending, the usual household tasks. Nothing you have not done before, I would imagine. The difference is you would be paid for it and you would be free to leave whenever you want. He paused. I will not lie to you, Katherine. It can be lonely out here and the work is hard, but you would be safe and you would be building something for yourself. She thought about going back to Green River and facing the town's gossip. She thought about leaving Wyoming entirely and trying to start over somewhere she knew no one and had no connections. Neither option appealed to her. But staying here, working for this man who had shown her more kindness in one night than her own father had in years, that felt right. I would like to stay, she said quietly, if the offer is genuine. It is. Isaiah extended his hand across the table and she shook it, sealing their agreement. His grip was warm and firm, and something sparked in Katherine's chest at the contact. She pushed the feeling away, not ready to examine it. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Isaiah's ranch was a working operation, and there was always something that needed doing. Katherine threw herself into the household tasks with determination, proving her worth. She learned quickly that Isaiah ran a tight ship but treated his workers well. Besides Jack, who cared for the horses, there was Miguel, an older man who handled the cattle, and Tommy, a quiet young man who did general labor. All of them treated her with respect, tipping their hats when they saw her, thanking her for meals, never overstepping. Isaiah himself was a puzzle. He was patient and kind, but he kept a wall around himself, rarely speaking about personal matters. He worked from dawn until dark, pushing himself hard. Katherine often watched him from the kitchen window as he worked with the horses, admiring his skill and strength. She told herself it was simple appreciation, nothing more. But as January turned into February, she could not deny that her feelings were changing. It was the small things that got to her. The way he always made sure she had enough firewood before a cold night. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which was happening more often as winter wore on. She found herself looking forward to their meals together, to the quiet conversations they had in the evenings when work was done. One night in late February, they were sitting by the fire, Katherine mending a shirt and Isaiah reading a book about horse breeding, when he suddenly spoke. I have been thinking about something. She looked up from her stitching. What is that? You never talk about what happened that night, about your father, about how you are feeling about all of it. His eyes met hers. I do not want to pry, but I also do not want you keeping everything bottled up inside. Katherine's hand stilled on the fabric. I do not know what there is to say. My father made his choice and I made mine. I have not seen him since that night, and I do not particularly want to. Are you angry? Isaiah asked gently. Furious, she admitted, the word bursting out with more force than she intended. And hurt, and betrayed. He was supposed to protect me, to care for me, and instead he sold me like I was nothing. How am I supposed to forgive that? I do not think you have to forgive it, Isaiah said. Some things are unforgivable, but I think you need to let yourself feel it, not just push it down and pretend you are fine. Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes. If I let myself feel it, I am afraid I will fall apart. Isaiah set his book aside and leaned forward. Then fall apart. You are allowed. You are safe here. That simple statement, that assurance of safety, broke something open inside her. Katherine set aside the mending and let the tears come, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Isaiah moved to sit beside her on the sofa, and after a moment's hesitation, he put his arm around her shoulders, letting her cry against his chest. He did not tell her to stop or that everything would be fine. He just held her and let her grieve for the father she should have had, for the childhood that had been stolen from her, for the innocence she had lost. When the storm finally passed, she pulled back embarrassed. "I am sorry. I should not have done that." "Yes, you should have," Isaiah said firmly. "Katherine, you have been through something terrible. You are entitled to your feelings." He reached up and gently brushed away a tear that clung to her cheek. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, but even strong people need to break sometimes." She looked up at him, at the kindness in his face, at the strength and gentleness combined, and something shifted in her heart. This was not simple gratitude or appreciation. This was something deeper, something that terrified and exhilarated her at the same time. She was falling in love with Isaiah Hart. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt, and she quickly stood, needing distance. "I should go to bed. Tomorrow is Sunday, and I want to get an early start on bread baking." If Isaiah noticed her sudden retreat, he did not comment on it. He simply nodded and bid her good night. But as Katherine lay in bed that night, she could not stop thinking about the warmth of his arm around her, the solid strength of his chest, the tenderness in his voice. She was in dangerous territory now, falling for a man who had been clear that their relationship was professional. He had offered her employment, not romance. She needed to get these feelings under control before she ruined everything, but controlling her heart proved impossible. As winter gave way to early spring, Katherine found herself more and more aware of Isaiah. The way he moved, the sound of his voice, the rare moments when he laughed. She caught herself staring at him across the dinner table, wondering what it would be like to kiss him. She blushed at the thought, scandalized by her own forwardness but unable to stop. She thought she was hiding it well, but apparently not. One afternoon in March, while Katherine was working in the garden, preparing the soil for spring planting, Jack approached her with a knowing grin. "Miss Katherine, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Jack. Are you sweet on the boss?" Katherine's face flamed. "I do not know what you mean." Jack laughed. "Yes, you do. We all see it, miss. The way you watch him, the way you smile when he talks to you, and if you want my opinion, he is sweet on you too." "That is ridiculous," Katherine said, but her heart was pounding. "Isaiah is my employer. He was kind enough to give me a job and a place to stay. That is all." "If you say so, miss." Jack tipped his hat and walked away, still grinning. Katherine tried to dismiss the conversation, but she could not. Was it possible that Isaiah felt something for her too? She had not imagined he did, had assumed his kindness was just part of his nature. But now she found herself watching him more closely, looking for signs. She found them. The way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she was not looking. The way he always stood just a little too close when they were working together in the kitchen. The way his voice softened when he said her name. Hope bloomed in her chest, fragile and tentative, but impossible to ignore. In late March, a band of outlaws passed through the area, causing trouble at several ranches. Isaiah gathered his men and made sure everyone was armed and alert. He moved Katherine's bedroom to a room with a lock on the inside and gave her a rifle. "I do not think they will come here, but I want you prepared. Do you know how to shoot?" "My mother taught me," Katherine said. "I am not an expert, but I can hit what I aim at." "Good girl." The words of praise sent warmth through her. "If anyone tries to get in this house who should not be here, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understand?" she nodded, sobered by the seriousness in his expression. That night, Isaiah slept on the sofa in the main room, his gun within easy reach. Katherine lay awake for hours, listening to every sound, but nothing happened. By morning, word had come that the outlaws had been caught by the law over in Rock Springs. The danger had passed, but something had changed between her and Isaiah. The close call had stripped away some of the formal distance they had maintained. He started finding reasons to touch her, a hand on her shoulder, steadying her elbow when she stumbled, brushing flour from her cheek. Each contact left Katherine's skin tingling and her heart racing. One evening in April, as they cleaned up after dinner, Isaiah suddenly spoke. "Katherine, can I ask you something personal?" Her hand stilled in the dishwater. "Yes. Do you ever think about the future, about what you want from life?" She considered the question carefully. "I used to dream about leaving my father's house, about having my own life. Now that I have that, I find myself dreaming about something more." "What is more?" he asked quietly. Katherine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "A family, a real home, someone to share my life with." She turned to face him, water dripping from her hands. "Someone who sees me as more than just a burden or a means to an end." Isaiah stepped closer, his gray eyes intense. "You have never been a burden, Katherine, not from the first moment I saw you in that saloon." He reached out and took her hands, heedless of the dishwater. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen until I am done. Can you do that?" She nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. "When my wife died, I thought I was done with love. I thought I would spend the rest of my life working this ranch and nothing more. But then I met you and everything changed." His thumbs stroked across her knuckles, sending shivers up her arms. "You are strong and brave and beautiful. You make this house feel like a home again. You make me laugh. You make me want to be better. And somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." Katherine's breath caught. "Isaiah, I know there is an age difference," he continued quickly. "I am 29 and you are 20. I know I am not much to look at. I know I am rough around the edges and probably too set in my ways. But I love you, Katherine, and I needed you to know that. If you do not feel the same, we can go back to how things were, and I promise I will never mention it again. But if there is even a chance you might feel something for me, I would like to court you properly." Katherine felt tears welling up, but these were happy tears. "Isaiah, I have been in love with you for months. I thought I was being foolish, that you could never see me as anything but the girl you rescued." His face lit up with a joy that transformed him. "Katherine Jones, you are so much more than that. You are everything." He pulled her close, and she went willingly, wrapping her wet hands around his neck. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and perfect. Katherine had never been kissed before, and she had not known it could feel like this, like coming home and starting an adventure at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "Does this mean you will let me court you?" Isaiah asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Katherine said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The courtship that followed was everything Katherine had ever dreamed of, and nothing like what she had expected. Isaiah was tender and attentive, but he was also proper, mindful of her reputation and his own honor. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow and held her hand during evening walks. He taught her to ride better and laughed when she beat him in a race. He read to her in the evenings, his deep voice bringing the words to life. The ranch hands watched their romance bloom with obvious approval. Miguel, the eldest, pulled Katherine aside one day and said, "That boy has been lonely too long. You are good for him, Miss Katherine. You bring the light back to his eyes." As spring turned to summer, Isaiah began talking about the future in concrete terms. "I want to expand the ranch," he told her one June evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Add more cattle, maybe breed better horses. I want to build something lasting, something to pass on to our children. He paused. That is, if you want children. I do, Katherine said softly. I want everything with you, Isaiah. He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. Then marry me, Katherine. I know we have not been courting long by traditional standards, but I am sure. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Marry me and be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy. Yes, Katherine said, her voice shaking with joy. Yes, I will marry you. Isaiah swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Katherine felt happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. She had gone from being traded like property to being cherished and loved. She had gone from having nothing to having everything that mattered. They were married in early July in a simple ceremony at the small church in Green River. Katherine wore a dress she had sewn herself from beautiful cream fabric that Isaiah had bought for her from the mercantile. Isaiah wore his best suit, and he looked so handsome that Katherine could barely breathe when she saw him waiting at the altar. Jack, Miguel, and Tommy were there, along with a handful of other ranchers and townspeople who had come to respect Isaiah over the years. Katherine's father was not invited and did not come. She had seen him once since that terrible night in December, and he had tried to apologize, but the words had rung hollow. She had told him that she forgave him for her own peace of mind, but she wanted nothing more to do with him. It had hurt, severing that final tie, but it had also been freeing. She was starting fresh with Isaiah, and she did not want the poison of the past seeping into their new life. The ceremony itself was short and sweet. When Isaiah said, "I do," his voice was strong and sure. When Katherine said the same, she felt like she was stepping into the life she was always meant to have. They sealed their vows with a kiss that made the small congregation chuckle, and then they were walking back down the aisle hand in hand, husband and wife. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, with everyone pitching in to create a feast. There was roasted beef and chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and pies that the women from town had contributed. There was even a fiddle player who provided music for dancing. Katherine danced with Isaiah until her feet hurt, and then she danced some more because she could not bear to be separated from him even for a moment. As the sun set and the guests began to leave, Isaiah pulled Katherine close and whispered in her ear, "Are you ready to start our marriage properly, Mrs. Hart?" The title sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Hart. She was Mrs. Isaiah Hart now, bound to this man for the rest of her life, and she could not imagine anything more perfect. "I am ready," she whispered back. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Isaiah patient and gentle as he introduced Katherine to the physical side of marriage. There was some awkwardness, some nervous laughter, but mostly there was love. When Katherine woke the next morning in Isaiah's arms, she felt transformed. She was a wife now, a partner, the mistress of her own home. She had agency and love and a future bright with possibility. The summer passed in a haze of happiness. Katherine threw herself into making the ranch house truly feel like their home. She sewed curtains for the windows and embroidered pillowcases. She planted a larger garden and learned to can vegetables for the winter. She worked alongside Isaiah when he needed help and learned the business side of ranching. He treated her as a full partner, seeking her opinion on decisions, valuing her input. It was intoxicating, being respected and valued in this way. In August, Katherine realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just stress or the heat, but when she missed a second month and started feeling queasy in the mornings, she knew. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy, because she and Isaiah had talked about wanting children. Fear, because she remembered what had happened to his first wife. Excitement, because she was going to be a mother. Nervousness, because she had no idea if she would be any good at it. She decided to tell Isaiah that evening after dinner. She had planned a special meal, all his favorite foods, and wore her best dress. When they sat down to eat, Isaiah looked at her with concern. "Are you feeling well? You have been looking pale lately." "I am fine," Katherine assured him. "Actually, I am more than fine. I have something to tell you." He set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" "I am expecting a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. "We are going to have a child, Isaiah." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face crumpled and tears started streaming down his cheeks. Katherine's heart clenched with fear. Was he upset? Did he not want this? But then he was on his feet and pulling her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are having a baby." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, needing to hear the words. Happy does not begin to cover it. Isaiah pulled back and cupped her face in his hands. "I am terrified and thrilled and so deeply grateful. Katherine, you have given me everything. A reason to live, a reason to hope, and now this, a child." His thumbs brushed away tears she had not realized she was crying. "I will take care of you. I will make sure you have the best doctor, the best care. I will not lose you. I cannot lose you." "You will not lose me," Katherine said firmly. "I am strong, Isaiah. We will get through this together." The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Isaiah fretted over her constantly, bringing her crackers and ginger tea, holding her hair back when she was ill, rubbing her feet when they swelled. He insisted she rest more, taking over many of the household tasks himself or hiring a girl from town to help. Katherine appreciated his concern but also sometimes felt smothered by it. One night in October, she finally snapped. "Isaiah, I am pregnant, not dying. You need to let me live my life." He looked stung. "I am just trying to take care of you. I know, and I love you for it. But you are treating me like I am made of glass." She took his hand and placed it on her growing belly. "Feel that. Our baby is strong, and so am I. I need you to trust that." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You are right. I am sorry. It is just that when I think about what happened to Mary—" "I am not Mary," Katherine interrupted gently. "I know you loved her, and I know losing her nearly destroyed you. But I am not her, and this baby is not that baby. This is our story, Isaiah, and it is going to have a different ending." He pulled her close, and she felt the tension drain out of him. "You are right. You are absolutely right. I will try to worry less." "You can still worry," Katherine said with a small smile. "Just worry a normal amount, not an excessive amount." As autumn gave way to winter, Katherine bloomed. Her sickness passed, and she felt better than she had in months. Her belly grew round and firm, and she felt the baby moving inside her, a sensation that never failed to fill her with wonder. Isaiah would often place his hand on her stomach in the evenings, talking to the baby, telling their child about the ranch and the horses and the life they would have. In December, exactly a year after that terrible night in the saloon, Katherine went into labor. It was late evening, and the first pains took her by surprise. Isaiah immediately sent Tommy racing into town for the doctor and midwife, while he stayed with Katherine, holding her hand and coaching her through the contractions. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Katherine thought she could not do it, when the pain was too much and she wanted to give up. But Isaiah was there through it all, never leaving her side, encouraging her, loving her. Finally, as dawn broke on a clear December morning, their son was born. He came into the world wailing, his face red and furious, his tiny fists pumping. The midwife placed him in Catherine's arms, and she looked down at him with awe. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a head of dark hair just like his father's. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one. We have been waiting for you." Isaiah sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, staring at their son with an expression of complete wonder. "He is beautiful." "Catherine, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Catherine asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on one. Isaiah thought for a moment. "What about Robert, after your mother's father?" Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. Her grandfather had died when she was young, but she had loved him dearly. "Robert Hart. It is perfect." Their son, Robert, was a good baby, healthy and strong. He nursed well and grew quickly. Isaiah was a devoted father, waking in the night to walk with the baby when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, singing off key lullabies that made Catherine laugh. Watching him with their son made Catherine fall in love with him all over again. The months that followed were exhausting but joyful. Catherine adjusted to motherhood, learning as she went, making mistakes and figuring it out. Isaiah continued to run the ranch, but he made sure to spend time every day with Robert, playing with him, reading to him even though he was too young to understand. The ranch hands were all smitten with the baby, taking turns holding him and making faces to get him to smile. As Robert grew into a chubby, happy toddler, Catherine and Isaiah began talking about having more children. "I always wanted a large family," Catherine admitted one night. "I hated being an only child." "Then we will have more," Isaiah said, kissing her temple. "As many as you want." Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born in the spring of 1887. She had Catherine's green eyes and a head full of blonde curls. She was a serious baby, watching everything with intense focus. Robert, now 2, was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything. Catherine had her hands full managing 2 young children, but she loved every minute of it. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch prospered under Isaiah's careful management and Catherine's shrewd advice. They added more land, more cattle, better horses. They built a larger barn and renovated the house, adding more bedrooms for their growing family. In 1889, they had twin boys, Thomas and William, who kept everyone on their toes with their mischief and energy. In 1891, another daughter, Elizabeth, joined the family, sweet-tempered and easy. Catherine sometimes could not believe this was her life. She had gone from being a girl with no future to being the wife of a successful rancher and the mother of 5 healthy children. She had respect in the community. She had a voice. She had love. When she thought back to that terrible night in December of 1884, it felt like a different lifetime. That frightened, desperate girl seemed like a stranger. One evening in the summer of 1892, Catherine stood on the porch watching her family. Isaiah was in the yard with the children, playing some complicated game that involved a lot of running and laughing. Robert, now 7, was trying to organize everyone. Sarah, at 5, was bossing her younger brothers around. The twins, 3, were mostly just running in circles. And little Elizabeth, just over a year old, was toddling after them all, determined not to be left out. Isaiah looked up and caught Catherine watching. He said something to the children, then jogged over to the porch, sweeping her into his arms. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Hart?" "How lucky I am," Catherine said honestly. "How different my life could have been." Isaiah's expression grew serious. "I am the lucky one, Catherine. You saved me just as much as I saved you that night, maybe more." "We saved each other," Catherine corrected. "And built something beautiful together." "That we did." Isaiah kissed her, slow and sweet, and Katherine felt the same spark she had felt that first time, that sense of rightness and home. "What do you say we give these children another sibling?" Katherine laughed. "Isaiah Hart, I just got Elizabeth out of diapers. Give me at least a few months before we start on number 6. "Fair enough." He grinned at her, that boyish grin that still made her heart skip. "But just so you know, I plan to spend those months convincing you." "I do not think it will take much convincing," Katherine admitted. She loved their big, chaotic family. She loved the noise and the laughter and even the occasional tears. She loved that their house was always full of life. As the sun set over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been traded on the worst night of her life, and a cowboy had said she was coming home with him. At the time, she had not known what that meant. She had not known that home was not just a place but a person. She had not known that love could heal old wounds and create new possibilities. She had not known that the worst moment of her life would lead to the best moments. But now she knew. And standing here with Isaiah's arm around her waist and their children playing in the yard and the ranch spreading out before them, Katherine understood that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She was home. In the years that followed, the Hart family continued to thrive. Katherine did give Isaiah his 6th child in 1893, another daughter named Margaret who had her father's gray eyes and a will of iron. The children grew up strong and capable, learning to work the ranch alongside their parents. Robert developed a talent for breeding horses. Sarah became an accomplished horsewoman. The twins were tireless workers, always competing with each other but fiercely loyal. Elizabeth had a gift with animals, able to gentle even the most nervous horse. And little Margaret, true to form, decided she wanted to be a rancher like her father and would accept no other future. Isaiah and Katherine weathered the challenges that came their way with the same partnership that had defined their marriage from the beginning. There were hard winters and dry summers. There were illnesses and injuries and disappointments. But there was also laughter and love and the deep satisfaction of building a life together. In 1900, Robert turned 15 and announced he wanted to start his own herd. Isaiah gave him 20 head of cattle and taught him how to manage them. Katherine watched her firstborn grow into a young man and felt pride swell in her chest. He had his father's strength and her determination, and she knew he would do well. Sarah, at 13, had caught the eye of a neighboring rancher's son, a respectful young man named Daniel who stammered whenever she was near. Katherine and Isaiah discussed whether they should be concerned about their daughter's budding romance, but decided to trust her judgment and simply keep a watchful eye. The twins, now 11, were inseparable and constantly into some kind of trouble. Just last week, they had released all the chickens because they thought the birds looked sad in the coop. Katherine had spent hours rounding them up with the help of an exasperated but amused Isaiah. Elizabeth, at 9, was the family peacemaker, always smoothing over arguments and finding compromises. She reminded Katherine of herself at that age, trying to hold everything together. And Margaret, now 7, was a force of nature. She followed Isaiah everywhere, absorbing everything he taught her about ranching, about horses, about the land. She had no interest in dolls or dresses, preferring to be outside in the dirt and sunshine. One evening in May of 1901, as Katherine and Isaiah sat on the porch enjoying a rare moment of quiet, he took her hand and said, "We have done well, haven't we?" Katherine looked at him, at the silver threading through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes that came from years of squinting into the sun. He was 46 now, but still as strong as ever, still as devoted to his family. "We have done better than well," she said. We have done magnificent. I have been thinking about something, Isaiah continued. I am not getting any younger, and I want to make sure everything is in order. I have been talking to a lawyer about drawing up a will, making sure the ranch is divided fairly among the children. I want to make sure you are taken care of if anything happens to me. Nothing is going to happen to you, Katherine said firmly, but she felt a chill of fear. She could not imagine life without Isaiah. He was her partner, her love, her best friend. We cannot predict the future, Isaiah said gently, but we can prepare for it. I want you to promise me something, Katherine. If anything does happen to me, I want you to keep living. Keep loving. Keep being the amazing woman you are. Do not lock yourself away in grief like I did after Mary died. Promise me. Isaiah, promise me, he insisted. I promise, Katherine said, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. But you have to promise me the same thing. If I go first, you keep living too. You take care of our babies and you find joy where you can. Deal. Isaiah pulled her close, and they sat together watching the stars come out over the Wyoming plains. The night was warm and perfect, filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant call of an owl. Katherine breathed in the scent of earth and grass and home, committing this moment to memory. But despite their morbid conversation, both Isaiah and Katherine remained healthy and active. The ranch continued to prosper. They added yet another child in 1902, a surprise baby they named John, who arrived when Katherine was 42 and Isaiah 47. The older children doted on him, and he became the spoiled baby of the family, charming everyone with his ready smile. As the new century progressed, the Wild West that Katherine and Isaiah had known began to change. Towns grew larger, more civilized. Automobiles started appearing on the roads, frightening the horses. Telegraph lines connected distant places. The world was modernizing, but the Hart Ranch remained a place of tradition and hard work and family values. In 1905, Robert, now 20, married a sweet girl named Anna from Rock Springs. They had a simple ceremony at the ranch, and Katherine cried through the entire thing, watching her firstborn take his vows. Isaiah gave them a piece of land on the northern edge of the ranch to start their own place, helping Robert build a house with his own hands, just as he had done for Katherine all those years ago. Sarah married her Daniel in 1907, and they moved to his family's ranch about 20 miles away. Katherine missed her daughter but was happy to see her so loved and cherished. Sarah and Daniel had their first child, a son, in 1908, making Katherine and Isaiah grandparents for the first time. Holding that tiny baby, Katherine marveled at the passage of time and the continuation of their family line. The twins both left for college in Laramie in 1909, wanting to study modern ranching techniques. Isaiah was proud of their ambition but missed having them around. Elizabeth, now 17, was being courted by 3 different young men, and she could not decide which she liked best. Margaret, at 15, declared she would never marry and would run the ranch herself someday. And John, at 7, was following in his older sister's footsteps, determined to be a cowboy. As Katherine approached her 50th birthday in 1914, she reflected on the nearly 30 years she had been married to Isaiah. They had built an empire together, raised 7 children, weathered countless storms, both literal and figurative. Their love had only grown stronger with time, deepening into something unshakable. Isaiah's hair was completely silver now, and he moved a bit slower, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at Katherine. She had lines on her face and her hands were rough from years of work, but she had never felt more beautiful than when Isaiah told her she was. They had grown old together, and there was something profoundly satisfying about that. One evening, as they celebrated Catherine's 50th birthday with all the children and grandchildren gathered around, Isaiah stood and raised his glass. 30 years ago, on the worst night of her life, I told this woman she was coming home with me. I did not know then that she would become my home. I did not know that she would give me 7 incredible children and a life beyond anything I had dreamed. I did not know that I would love her more with each passing day. He turned to Katherine, his voice thick with emotion. "You are everything, Katherine Hart. Happy birthday, my love." Katherine stood and kissed him, not caring that their children and grandchildren were watching. "And you are my everything, Isaiah Hart. You saved my life that night, and then you gave me a life worth living. I love you more than words can say." The family erupted in cheers and applause. Robert proposed a toast to his parents. Sarah wiped away tears. The twins, home from college, raised their glasses with pride. Elizabeth, newly engaged to a fine young man named Christopher, beamed at her parents. Margaret, now studying agriculture at university, shouted that she wanted a love just like theirs someday. And little John, now 12, looked at his parents with awe, understanding for the first time the depth of what they had. As the party continued into the night, Katherine found herself thinking about that girl in the saloon, frightened and desperate, being traded like property. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that the cowboy who said she was coming home with him would become the love of her life, that she would have more happiness than she ever imagined possible. But of course, she could not go back. She could only move forward. And as Isaiah took her hand and led her in a dance while their family clapped along, Katherine knew that forward was the only direction she wanted to go. Forward with this man, with this family, with this life they had built together. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. Robert and Anna had 4 children and expanded their ranch to become one of the most successful in the area. Sarah and Daniel had 3 daughters who all inherited their mother's beauty and skill with horses. The twins graduated and returned to help run the Hart Ranch, bringing new ideas and techniques that made the operation even more profitable. Elizabeth and Christopher married and moved to Cheyenne, where Christopher worked as a lawyer. Margaret finished her studies and came home to the ranch, becoming Isaiah's right hand in managing the cattle operation. And John, the baby of the family, announced at 18 that he wanted to join the army, much to Katherine's dismay. Isaiah and Katherine became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family that included children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and the families of ranch workers who had stayed on for years. The Hart Ranch was not just a business, it was a community, a place where people were valued and cared for. In 1920, Isaiah was 70 and Katherine 66. They had slowed down considerably, leaving most of the day-to-day ranch operations to their children. But they still sat on the porch every evening, holding hands and watching the sunset, talking about everything and nothing. Their love had lasted through 45 years of marriage, and it showed no signs of fading. One evening in September, as the aspens on the hillsides began turning gold, Isaiah turned to Katherine with a serious expression. "I have something to tell you, and I need you to listen without interrupting." Katherine's heart clenched with fear, but she nodded. "I have been to the doctor," Isaiah continued. "My heart is not strong anymore. He says I could have years left, or it could be tomorrow. There is no way to know." He held up a hand as Katherine started to protest. "Let me finish. I am not afraid of dying, Katherine. I have had a good life, a full life. I have loved and been loved. I have raised fine children and seen my grandchildren grow. I have built something lasting. But I am afraid of leaving you. I am afraid of breaking my promise to make you happy." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "You have made me happy every single day, Isaiah Hart. If you left me tomorrow, I would still say I had the most beautiful life imaginable. You gave me everything." "And you gave me everything," Isaiah said, pulling her close. "I need you to remember that. When I am gone, I need you to remember how much I loved you. How much I always loved you, from that first moment in the saloon when I saw you standing there so brave and scared at the same time." "I will remember," Katherine whispered. "How could I forget?" They sat together until the stars came out, neither willing to let go of the other. And though Katherine prayed that night for more time, she knew in her heart that time was running out. Isaiah died peacefully in his sleep on a cold December morning in 1921, exactly 36 years after the night he had walked into Sullivan's saloon and changed Katherine's life forever. She woke to find him still and quiet beside her, a small smile on his face as though he had died dreaming of something beautiful. The grief hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and her strength. She laid her head on his chest and wept until she had no tears left. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over Wyoming to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by all who knew him. Katherine stood strong through the service, supported by her children and grandchildren. They buried Isaiah on the hill overlooking the ranch, the same hill where his first daughter was buried, where he had told Katherine he would someday rest. The months that followed were the hardest of Katherine's life. The house felt empty without Isaiah. The bed was too big. The silence was too loud. She found herself talking to him sometimes, telling him about her day, asking his opinion on ranch matters. Her children worried about her, but Katherine was determined to honor her promise. She kept living. She kept loving. She kept being involved in the ranch and her family. Slowly, the sharp edge of grief dulled into a persistent ache. Katherine learned to find joy again in small things. The laughter of her grandchildren, the beauty of a Wyoming sunrise, the satisfaction of a job well done. She threw herself into being a grandmother, spoiling the little ones and offering advice to the older ones. She became the matriarch of the family, the wise elder that everyone came to with their problems. In 1925, Katherine was 71 years old and in reasonably good health, though her joints ached and she tired easily. She had 16 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The Hart Ranch was still thriving under the management of Robert and the twins, with Margaret handling the cattle side of things with an iron fist and a sharp mind. One June evening, Katherine's children gathered to celebrate her 71st birthday. As they sat around the big dining table that Isaiah had built with his own hands, Robert stood to make a speech. "Mama, we have been talking, and we want you to know how grateful we are for everything you have done for us. You and Papa built this ranch from nothing. You raised us to be strong and honest. You taught us the value of hard work and the importance of family. You showed us what real love looks like. We are who we are because of you." Katherine looked around the table at her children's faces, each one so precious to her. She saw Isaiah in Robert's steady gray eyes, in Sarah's smile, in the twins' mischievous grins, in Elizabeth's kind heart, in Margaret's determination, in John's adventurous spirit. He lived on in all of them, and in the legacy they had built together. "Your father and I were partners in everything," Katherine said, her voice strong despite her age. "And now you are my partners. You have taken what we started and made it even better. I could not be prouder of any of you." She raised her glass. "To family, to the Hart legacy. And to the cowboy who came into that saloon on a snowy night and told me I was coming home with him. He gave me the greatest gift of all. He gave me all of you." They drank to that, and then the conversation turned to lighter topics, to ranch business and family gossip and plans for the future. As Katherine listened to the voices of her family swirling around her, she felt a deep sense of peace. Her life had not been easy, but it had been good. She had been loved and had loved in return. She had raised good people who were raising good people in turn. She had made a difference. Katherine Jones Hart lived until 1928, passing away peacefully at the age of 74 with all her children by her side. They buried her next to Isaiah on the hill, and her grave marker reads simply, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she made our house a home and our lives a blessing." The Hart Ranch continued for generations after that, passed down through the family, growing and changing with the times, but always holding to the values that Katherine and Isaiah had instilled. And though the Wild West that they had known faded into history, the love story that began on a snowy December night lived on, told and retold by their descendants, a testament to the power of courage, kindness, and love to transform lives. Robert often told his grandchildren about the night his father had ridden through a blizzard to save a woman being traded in a saloon. He told them how that act of bravery had created not just a family but a legacy. He told them that love was not just a feeling but a choice, a commitment, an action. And he told them that their grandmother had been the strongest, bravest woman he had ever known, and that they should all aspire to be like her. The story became part of the family lore, embellished with each telling but always holding the essential truth at its core. A woman in desperate circumstances, a cowboy who did the right thing, a love that conquered everything and built something beautiful. It was a Wild West romance in the truest sense, full of danger and adventure and triumph over adversity. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the aspens and the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, some of the family swore they could feel Katherine and Isaiah's presence on the hill, watching over the ranch they had built, the family they had created, and the love that had started it all. That love that began when snow buried a town and a cowboy said to a frightened girl, "You are coming home with me," and then spent the rest of his life making sure she knew that home was not a place, but wherever they were together. Their love story became a legend in Green River and the surrounding territory. Young couples would ride out to see the Hart Ranch, hoping that some of that legendary love would rub off on them. The townsfolk spoke of Katherine and Isaiah with respect and admiration, remembering how they had built an empire on love and hard work. And though the years passed and eventually everyone who had known them personally died, their story lived on, passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the hardest times, love could prevail. The Hart family remained prominent in Wyoming for over a century, and at every family gathering, someone would inevitably bring up the story of how it all started. They would talk about the blizzard of 1884, about the saloon where Katherine had been traded, about Isaiah riding in like a hero from a dime novel. They would talk about the ranch that had been built with love and sweat. They would talk about the 7 children who had all gone on to successful lives. And they would raise their glasses to Katherine and Isaiah, the original Harts, who had proven that love could conquer anything. And so the legacy continued, generation after generation, each one adding to the story, each one carrying forward the values that Katherine and Isaiah had lived by. Hard work, honesty, family, love. These were the pillars on which the Hart dynasty was built, and they stood the test of time. In the end, Katherine's life had been defined not by that terrible night when her father had betrayed her, but by what came after, by the courage she had shown in accepting Isaiah's help, by the love she had built with him, by the family they had created together, by the home she had made from nothing. She had gone from being a girl with no value in her father's eyes to being a woman who was valued beyond measure by everyone who knew her. And that transformation had started with a snowstorm, a saloon, and a cowboy who had seen her not as property, but as a person worth saving. That was the true magic of their story. Isaiah had not just saved Catherine's life that night. He had seen her worth when no one else did. He had treated her with dignity when she had been stripped of all dignity. He had given her choices when she had none. And in doing so, he had given her the foundation to become the woman she was meant to be: strong, capable, loving, brave. A woman who could raise 7 children, run a ranch, survive the death of her husband, and still find joy in life. And Katherine, in turn, had saved Isaiah. She had brought him back to life after years of grieving. She had filled his house with laughter again. She had given him children and purpose and love beyond measure. They had saved each other, really, and then they had built something beautiful together. That was the lesson that echoed through the generations. That love was not just about romance, though there was plenty of that in their story. Love was about seeing someone's worth. Love was about making choices every day to be there, to support, to encourage, to build together. Love was about partnership and respect and shared dreams. Love was about weathering storms together and celebrating victories together and growing old together. And on that hill, overlooking the Hart Ranch in Green River, Wyoming, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the final resting place of Katherine Jones Hart and Isaiah Hart. The inscriptions were simple, but they told the story of a love that had started on a desperate night and had lasted a lifetime. A love that had built a family, a ranch, a legacy. A love that had proven that even in the wild and dangerous world of the Old West, kindness could triumph over cruelty, and love could conquer all. The snow still fell on Green River every winter, just as it had that night in 1884. But now, when the townspeople saw the snow burying the streets, they remembered the story of Katherine and Isaiah. They remembered that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best moments. They remembered that love could come from the most unexpected places. And they remembered that home was not just a building, but the people we choose to share our lives with. And so the story ended, but also never ended, because true love stories never really end. They live on in the children and grandchildren. They live on in the values passed down. They live on in the memories shared and the stories told. Katherine and Isaiah's love story lived on long after they were gone, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever faced darkness and despaired of finding light, because their story proved that light was always possible. That love was always possible. That redemption was always possible. All it took was one person willing to step up and say, "You are coming home with me," and mean it with their whole heart.